This is Shasta Groene, a bright and innocent 8-year-old girl living a simple life with her family in Idaho. But in May 2005, everything changed when a stranger set his sights on her home.
I've got a little girl here with a tall gentleman, and she looks so much like this Shasta, and we're not sure. I don't know.
It's just often weird to me. The girl looks exactly like the little girl.
On July 2nd, 2005, nearly 2 months after the disappearance of 8-year-old Shasta Groene and her 9-year-old brother Dylan from their home near Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, there was finally a sign of life. Their family had been brutally murdered, and the search for the siblings had gripped the nation, but their fate remained uncertain until that day.
I don't think anything prepared me for the experience in the Groene murder investigation.
It's the type of case that I go home and have nightmares about.
He would pass by a location that clearly children lived there.
He sees Shasta playing in the front yard. He surveils the house.
He had thought about everything to make sure that he was going to commit the perfect crime.
Shasta lived in a loving family with her mother, Brenda, her stepfather, Mark, her 2 older brothers, Dylan and Slade.
My mom loved music. We were just dancing around the living room, and she always wanted to cook and have food on the table every night when everyone was home, and I helped her cook a lot.
Despite financial difficulties, their home was filled with love, music, and laughter. Shasta and Dylan were inseparable, spending their time fishing, camping, and playing outside.
I've never met anybody in my life that was like him. He was friends with the kids that got picked on, but then he was also super popular. He was my best friend.
But on the morning of May 16th, 2005, this idyllic life was abruptly shattered. At 6 a.m., Brenda woke her daughter in a panic. "There's a man here who doesn't want us to be here," she whispered.
She had actually come into the room and said that there's a man here that doesn't want us to be here.
Shasta followed her mother into the living room, where a man with a shotgun ordered the family to lie on the floor. At first, Shasta thought he was a police officer, but when he tied them up with zip ties and duct tape, she realized the horrifying reality.
My stepdad Mark had said, "We don't have money." We were hearing bangs, and then he was screaming and yelling.
He attacked Mark, Brenda, and 13-year-old Slade with a hammer, ignoring their screams.
I was in the house with my family members, and I didn't know if they were dead or not.
Shasta and Dylan, paralyzed with terror, were separated from their family and taken into the backyard.
He grabbed me, picked me up, and took me into the backyard and laid me under the tree next to my brother.
Moments later, Slade, injured, stumbled out of the house in a desperate attempt to escape. The attacker caught up to him and struck him down once again. Slade collapsed and died near the picnic table.
He was sitting on the picnic table, and he was just, sitting up, and then he just laid down.
The man forced Shasta and Dylan into his vehicle and drove them nearly 160 kilometers to a remote campsite in the Lolo National Forest in Montana. There, he admitted to killing their family and showed them the hammer he had used.
He grabbed the hammer. He said, "See this hammer? This is the hammer that I murdered your mom and your stepdad and your brother with." And he was like, "They're not alive, and you're never going to see them again."
Meanwhile, a neighbor discovered the crime scene and alerted the police.
I went to the door to pay the little kid $10 for mowing the lawn, and there's blood all over the door. Nobody comes through the door.
Officers found the bodies of Brenda, Mark, and Slade. Slade had crawled back into the house to die near his mother. Shasta and Dylan were missing, and the search for them began immediately. Investigators combed the property for clues, issued an Amber Alert, and questioned family and friends. Suspicion briefly fell on the children's father, Steve, due to a recent custody dispute.
I'd like to address my children's abductors or abductor. Please release my children safely. They had nothing to do with any of this.
However, he was cleared after passing a polygraph test and providing an alibi. For weeks, the community lived in fear and uncertainty, dreading the worst. The brutal nature of the crime suggested a personal motive, yet no one could fathom who would want to destroy the Groene family.
Is back to square one in the search for 2 Idaho children missing since Monday.
Police are following up hundreds of tips in their search for Shasta and Dylan Groene.
Thousands of tips poured in, but none led to a breakthrough. At the campsite, Shasta and Dylan endured unimaginable horrors. Their captor subjected them to physical and emotional abuse, forcing Shasta to watch as he tortured her brother.
The fact that the bodies were so beaten up so badly, it made the crime appear to be a crime of passion.
You begin to think about who could have been so angry at this family to want to inflict such injury on these people.
He played cruel mind games, promising they could return home if they obeyed him. He even had them write letters to their father filled with false hope. "We might see you again," one letter read, but the letters were never sent.
Dear Dad, I miss you very much, and me and Dylan know what happened to Mom, Mark, and Slade, and we both feel very sorry for them. And we both miss you and Jesse and Vance, and we might see you guys again.
Another twisted manipulation from the man who controlled their every move. As weeks passed, Dylan's spirit began to break. Shasta, however, displayed remarkable resilience, using her intelligence to stay alive. She knew that her survival depended on keeping her captor calm and satisfied. Back in Coeur d'Alene, police pursued a promising lead. They discovered a fingerprint on the Groene family's front door matching Robert Lutner, a man with a criminal record who had attended a barbecue at the Groenes' home the day before the murders. Lutner owed Brenda and Mark money and had disappeared shortly after the crime, raising suspicions. When Lutner contacted his parole officer and learned that the police wanted to question him, he voluntarily returned to clear his name. His quick cooperation left investigators puzzled. Was he a remorseful killer or just an innocent man willing to cooperate?
If somebody's going to turn themselves in that quickly, it's either going to be somebody who's feeling so much remorse for what they have done and they want to confess to it, or it's somebody that is completely innocent and wants to get it off their back.
After hours of intense interrogation, Lutner denied any involvement. He even offered to take a polygraph test, which he passed without issue. Investigators found no evidence linking him to the crime, and Lutner was officially ruled out as a suspect.
I said, I promise that we're going to make it out alive. That was my way of comforting my brother, just letting him know that we would never stop fighting.
As the investigation continued to hit dead ends, Shasta began to realize that her captor had no intention of releasing her or Dylan. Despite their desperate situation, the siblings leaned on each other for strength. When Dylan started to lose hope, Shasta remained determined to stay strong for both of them. She tried to comfort him, saying, "I promise we'll get out of here alive," even though she had no idea how they would escape.
He very vividly and in detail described murders of two sisters from Seattle, Amija White and Carmen. He would tell us the way that he had done it, where he had placed their bodies. When he had started telling us about the murders, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to pretend like I'm drinking this.
I would ask questions about his life, ask him about his family, and could I meet them one day?
It was a conscious thing, like, I need to make him think that I love him or that I want to be here with him.
Her words became Dylan's lifeline, but the abuse they endured grew worse. The man began forcing drugs and alcohol on them to further manipulate and control them. Believing they were under the influence, he revealed chilling details about past crimes. He spoke of murdering two sisters from Seattle, Samieja White and Carmen Cubias, describing in gruesome detail how he had killed them and where he had left their bodies. Although terrified, Shasta pretended to drink while listening carefully, determined to remember every detail that might later help identify him. Realizing that her survival depended on her ability to manipulate her captor, she began to build a rapport with him. She asked questions about his life and family, even feigning a desire to know more about them. This strategy seemed to soften him, and he started treating her with slightly more kindness. Shasta deliberately played along, knowing that one wrong move could cost her life. One day, the man gave the siblings a cruel and impossible task. If they could catch a squirrel, he claimed, they would be allowed to go home. Dylan eventually managed to catch one, sparking a brief glimmer of hope in them. But the man's promise was another twisted lie. Instead of releasing them, he prepared to take them to another location. Then, in a sudden and brutal turn, he shot Dylan in front of Shasta.
I had just given him a hug, and so I was holding his hand, and I heard a loud bang. And then I felt my brother's hand slip from mine.
I couldn't even say anything, I couldn't scream, I just didn't even know what to do.
At first, the man claimed it was an accident, but Shasta knew better. A second shot made it clear that Dylan's death was intentional. She was then forced to help place his body on a tarp, where her captor burned it before her eyes. Overwhelmed with grief and trauma, Shasta went into shock and was unable to speak for days. After Dylan's murder, Shasta was left completely alone to endure her captor's cruelty.
I was just confused, and I remember, I think for about a week I just didn't talk. I couldn't say anything. I was just frozen.
He moved her to another campsite, this time closer to areas where hikers and passers-by might see them, despite the proximity to potential help. His threats kept her from calling for rescue. One night, he gave her a terrifying ultimatum. She could choose between strangulation or being shot like her brother. Desperate to buy time, Shasta chose strangulation, hoping to find a way to escape.
He was just like, you have the choice to be strangled or you have the choice to be shot like your brother, and that one's going to be quicker. I felt like if I had chose the strangulation, that I might have a chance to talk him out of what he was doing.
As he tightened the rope around her neck, her thoughts flashed to her family. She heard her mother's voice and saw her face. With all the courage she could muster, she used the man's nickname, Jet, to address him. "Please don't, Jet," she whispered. Her plea had an unexpected effect. The man bursts into tears and lets her go, saying he can't go through with it.
I noticed that when I would use that name with him, it would soften a little bit, it would soften him. And he's like, "What did you say?" He started crying, and he was like, "I can't do this."
In the following days, Shasta continues to manipulate him, convincing him that she wants to stay with him. She even suggests visiting places from her childhood, hoping he will take her to a public location. On July 2nd, 2005, after weeks of building trust, her captor decides to drive her into town.
He basically sat me down and asked if I would be his kid and I would stay with him, that I would call him Dad.
He's like, "I want to take you to meet my mom. Would you meet her?" And I had said yes.
And I said, "Can you take me to where I grew up? I want to show you where I went to school. And I want to show you where my best friend lives. I want to show you all these places that are important to me because you're important to me." And he was like, "Yeah, of course, I would love to."
He stops at a store in Coeur d'Alene, unaware that Shasta is praying someone will recognize her. Although a store employee later identifies her through surveillance footage, it is too late to intervene. Shasta's hope fades briefly, but she remains determined. When the man asks if she is hungry, she suggests eating at a local Denny's restaurant, knowing it will be full of people.
As I was walking in, I noticed that my missing persons poster was right there. There was this guy standing outside, and he was with his friends, and he nodded his head, and I nodded my head, and he went up to the counter and made it kind of seem like he was conversating with one of the waitresses, and then I seen her look over at me.
They were my only table at the time, and I immediately recognized her. His entire world revolved around her. She didn't speak without his permission. There was something just not okay.
As they enter, Shasta immediately notices her missing person poster hanging near the entrance. She exchanges a subtle glance with a man outside who alerts a waitress. Inside, the waitress recognizes Shasta immediately. She didn't speak without his permission, the waitress recalls. Describing the disturbing dynamic between the man and the girl, waitress Amber Dean has no idea who the man with Shasta is or what he is capable of, but she knows she can't risk alerting him to her suspicions. Discreetly, she approaches her manager and says, "I think we should call the Coeur d'Alene police."
I've got a little girl here with a tall gentleman, and she looks so much like this Shasta, and we're not sure. I don't know.
Amber's calm but decisive action sets everything in motion. Other restaurant patrons also start noticing the little girl, and soon the police receive the long-awaited call. Shasta senses that people recognize her, but she is unsure whether this will lead to her rescue or her downfall. "He's so smart," she recalls thinking. "Even if they know I'm with him, he might have an excuse and they'll just let him go." Tension rises as the man becomes restless and wants to leave, but the Denny staff acts quickly. Amber pretends there is a problem with the bill to stall him. Meanwhile, other patrons position themselves strategically near the door, ready to intervene if necessary. Finally, the police arrive. They approach Shasta and ask for her name. She quietly confirms her identity, and officers immediately arrest the man.
The whole entire restaurant started clapping. They all knew who I was. They all knew that I was a missing person, and it was kind of like they all played a factor into my rescue.
Before they even leave the Denny's, Shasta tells the police.
As Shasta is taken to safety, relief washes over the restaurant. The patrons applaud and cheer, knowing their collective efforts saved the girl. Looking back, Shasta says, "It was like they all played a role in my rescue." Shasta tells the police that the man with her is responsible for the murders of her family and her abduction. He is identified as 42-year-old Joseph Duncan, a level 3 sex offender with a horrifying past. Duncan's criminal history began at the age of 15, and he had been repeatedly charged with abuse and assault. His stolen car contained a shotgun as well as video recordings documenting his captivity of Shasta and Dylan. Shasta is finally safe, but Dylan's fate remains unknown. Duncan refuses to speak, forcing investigators to rely on the brave young girl. Despite the unimaginable horrors she endured, Shasta opens up, detailing how Duncan kidnapped her and Dylan, abused them, and ultimately murdered her brother.
The thought of an 8-year-old girl having to observe this and then having to relive it to an investigator after the fact is just amazing to me. She witnessed things that grown people would be traumatized for the rest of their lives and never be able to speak about.
She even provides information on other murders Duncan confessed to during her captivity. Shasta explains that Duncan targeted her family after seeing her and Dylan playing in the yard. Over several days, he watched the house, befriended the family's dog to keep it quiet, and meticulously planned his attack. Shasta recalls his chilling words, "I wanted to commit the perfect crime." Duncan's trial exposes the full extent of his brutality.
I remember him telling me that he was able to get the dog to come to him, and he gave her treats and stuff and like befriended our pit bull so that when he did come into the house to do what he was going to do, there was not that type of issue to get in the way.
He had thought about everything to make sure that he was going to commit the perfect crime.
The prosecution presents disturbing video footage he recorded himself, documenting his crimes against the siblings. This evidence becomes crucial in securing his conviction.
I think it's probably the single most disturbing piece of evidence, disturbing thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
While the video is extremely disturbing, it is the absolute key piece of evidence prosecutors can use to send Joseph Duncan to death row.
On October 16, 2006, Duncan pleads guilty to the triple murder of Brenda, Mark, and Shasta Groene and receives 3 life sentences. In federal court, he pleads guilty to 10 additional charges related to Shasta and Dylan's kidnapping and abuse, as well as Dylan's murder.
31 years of being involved in the criminal justice system, I have never met a more evil person than Joseph Duncan.
He is sentenced to death and sent to death row in Terre Haute, Indiana, where he remains until his death from brain cancer on March 28, 2021. While Duncan's death ends the legal battles, Shasta's journey to healing is far from over. She suffers from severe PTSD, and the media attention makes it difficult for her to rebuild a normal life.
He was just a really good brother to me, and that he was really sweet to people. Happy birthday, and tell Mom, Dylan, and Mark I love them and stuff, and hopefully we'll get to see them again.
I just wanted to be a normal teenage girl. There was still court stuff going on with Joseph Duncan. There was still counseling that I had to do, and I didn't feel good about myself or the person that I was. So I think that all kind of pushed me over the edge.
In search of an escape, she turns to drugs and alcohol, eventually landing in a juvenile detention center. There, she meets other young women with similar struggles, marking a turning point in her life. A judge's words leave a deep impression on her. "Shasta, you have so much to give. You are better than this." Shasta begins to rebuild her life after meeting her husband, who is related to Samiejo White and Carmen Cubias, 2 sisters Duncan also killed. Despite her past, Shasta finds strength in her family. "For a long time, I thought he had taken everything from me, even my ability to have children, but I refused to let him take that too." Today, Shasta focuses on using her experiences to help others. Don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating videos like this one. Thanks for watching.